So that was awesome. It's hard to come up after a keynote speaker, especially being Wendell Clark, so I will try to transition this well. But great transition into our next session. So effective teamwork is dependent on clear and concise communication, especially during a crisis like a cyber breach. In our first session, How to Communicate After a Breach, you'll learn about the process of activating a crisis communication plan and the impact communication can have on your organization's ability to successfully deliver their services post-breach. Here to introduce our speakers and to moderate the session is Coode. Kat is the founder of Binary Tattoo and has over 20 years of experience in mobile development and software architecture. In addition to her work guiding organizations through end-to-end global privacy regulation compliance and delivering privacy education seminars, Kat is also an engineer, a speaker, and a software architecture consultant and author. Kat's motivation to help others was born out of her concern for her kids and our ever-changing digital landscape. So please join me in welcoming your moderator, Coode, to the stage.
Do you guys want to go ahead and I'll come in? Good morning, good morning. I have to follow Wendell, so fortunately I had a little buffer here. So you get a hockey analogy this morning because we're all bridging hockey to cybersecurity. That's where we're going to go. You did not hear professional hockey player in my bio, so I will do my best here. From a business objective perspective, in hockey, your objective is to get the puck to the other end of the ice and score a goal. It would make for a very boring hockey game if we did not have an opposing team here, but it would make it much easier to reach your business objective. We have the same thing for us in business where we have our business objectives every day. The problem or difference between hockey and business is we are not used to playing defense all the time. We don't have forwards in defense. We just have people moving forward all the time. So when a breach occurs, communication and teamwork, like Rhonda said, is key to make sure that you can pull all of your forwards back in order to defend your company. And that's where we're going to go today. We are going to talk about how best to prepare, endure, and recover from an incident through communication. I have my esteemed panel today. I have Kalyan Chakravarthy and Jim Doggett, so I am going to allow you guys to introduce yourselves.
Thank you, Kat. And me and Kat had a very good session about talking session in the backstage about hockey. We wanted to see who has more knowledge, and Kat won hands down. My name is Kalyan Chakravarthy, or I go by Casey. I'm the Chief Information Officer for the region of Durham, as well as I'm in the board for Durham College and Grandview Kids. And Ali, I completely miss you over here.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Jim Doggett, the CISO at a startup called Semperis, where we focus on Active Directory. I've got a long history working in the cyber field, 27 years at EY, retired partner there, and then CISO at Kaiser Permanente, a large healthcare entity, and then on to AIG, a large insurance company where I was a CISO.
Fantastic. All right, so we're going to start with preparing from a perspective of communication. Jim, I'm going to start with you. Yep. How do you decide as a company, and then communicate that with everyone, how you are going to define what an incident is?
Yeah. Well, again, every breach does not necessarily qualify to be an incident. So to me, that's the first thing you have to make determination. We have events happen every day within the world of security where things happen. The key is, at what point does it cross a threshold to become an official company incident where you have to actually change behavior and do things different? And again, there's no set formula from my perspective, at least all the places I've worked. It really comes down to how much damage can it potentially do to the company? Is this an event that will be a minor distraction, or is this something that will shut down my company, such as ransomware today, that requires me to take a completely different approach and in essence turn on our incident plan, our incident response plan, and then start activities that are going to be somewhat different than normal operations.
I think more than like just from going from an event to incident, like even from an incident's perspective, like I think there needs to be a magnitude of the incident, because like there are smaller incidents that don't need an execution of a full IR plan, and there are some major incidents or like more than minor incidents that needs to be executed to have that IR plan. So that decision is definitely, as Jim has said, depends upon what has happened and what is at stake. And that is the first thing that you want to draft in an IR plan, that to say, how are you determining that, so that like you can have an action plan based on that, because you don't want to execute IR plan for every event that's happening in security at your organization.
Yeah. I think as a security team too, having knowledge of what that incident response plan has and when to enact it, a really critical step, because at least I've been through incidents where we wasted time deciding, well, how important is this? Is this breach enough to where I need to call, oh, no, I think I can take care of it. So I step back and try to fix it for a while beforehand. And again, that came, from my perspective at least, from really not being prepared and not having gone through drills to make it so I know, no, if this happens, we've got to get communication going quickly as opposed to waiting and trying to fix it. And I'll bet most of you all have heard of incidents where someone, something goes bad, oh, we can fix it. We'll let my team work on it for a while, and in the end, you've waited too long.
Absolutely. And one thing we see a lot is people are getting security awareness training from third parties, which is fantastic, but they're not including in their security awareness training incident response. And so your whole company needs to be aware of what that plan is, how do you define this incident that you have, and what are the different steps. All right, so speaking of internal, there are typically 3 steps. You have somebody finds an incident or thinks they found an incident. There is notifying your team, and then internally notifying. How do we do that? Where do we start about setting up this internal communication? Casey, let's start with you.
Yeah, I think one thing about incident response planning is like it's mostly common sense, but like when panic hits, like we forget about common sense. So from an internal communication perspective, there's not much of difference between what you're communicating externally and what you're communicating internally. So you need to have a clear message, because you also need to understand your employees are the mouthpiece, and they are going to be defending you, as well as like they're going to informing a lot of questions that is coming in. So keeping them in loop is very, very important. You need to have a clear, consistent message to say that like what has happened, what do you know till now, and when are you providing the next update, as well as like one key thing is like if you are providing an email address or a phone number to really contact back and provide feedback, make sure that like somebody is answering it, because that's one thing that I see majority of the people don't do. They put in a communication and say, connect us at xyz@xyz.com, but nobody's answering that message. So that provides a sense of like uninformation, not having that kind of communication that is there. So make sure that like there is somebody who is responding to those messages.
The point I'd make here is that everyone needs to understand their role when a breach or anything like that happens. You don't want everyone communicating. And that's why it's important in advance to let people know that, no, you're not the mouthpiece for the company internally or externally. Because if you actually go back and look at some of the major breaches, some of the worst problems that happen are the things that hurt the breach and made it worse and exacerbated it was when too many people came out with messages too early or the wrong message. And again, centralizing those messages that go out, who controls it, when, and having that all set up in advance is absolutely critical. And I've been through at least 2 incidents where we had, and again, we were very global, but one of our far regions decided they had to talk to someone locally there, and it got out, and it ended up it was the wrong communication. So then we had to go back and backtrack it, and our communications group did. So again, making sure folks know in advance, and when I say folks, everyone in the company knowing who's allowed to talk and who's not allowed to talk when there is a breach is just absolutely critical.
So in terms of having employees report a breach internally, there's two schools of thoughts on this one. So I think you hit the nail on the head, Jim, with that not all incidents are breaches, right? Not all incidents need to be reported. If somebody has lost a laptop, the laptop was locked, you found it later, it's not an issue. So there's two schools of thought on having an internal email address, or some people use Slack channel in which to report a breach, and some people say it's great because it goes directly to your IT team, you know exactly what's happening, and other people say you don't want that because then you could end up with 25 emails in your inbox that say, I think we have an incident, and then you could end up getting called to task on that one. So when it comes to having employees report internally, what system do you set up so that they know how everyone has access and they know how to report that? Okay.
Sure. From a reporting perspective, I always subscribe to the open. I'd rather our team get more information than less because, again, if they have to make the decision, they may not, may have someone in the sales department who knows nothing about security, thinks it's a breach or something's happened to his or her computer. I'd much rather that person report that up and then we make the evaluation as to how critical that may be. So we have emails, we have Slack channels or Teams messages, or we have phone messages that we've done, and we've put that all in our training that all employees have to go through, is if you see something, go ahead and say something.
Yeah, I think more than the channel, it is about the process, with which, how you are communicating to your employees to say that, if something, as you said, if you see something, say something kind of it. But, that's great to say, but, you need to create to have the channel for everybody to say something about it so that, they can inform us. And, there will be a lot of false positives in that. This is, and it is expected out of it. But, even if you can figure out one from the 100, I think it is worth to have the channel set up.
Absolutely. And I'm sure everyone anecdotally at this point has heard of some ransomware, all the systems go down. So you don't have your Slack and you don't have your email and you don't have your sometimes even phone system. So where are the alternatives that we can set up so that people can communicate a breach when you have no system?
Yeah, I think a lot of people laugh about it when I say this, but you need to have a printout of your IR plan that is accessible in your office, at least 3 to 4 copies. And I could see a lot of people smiling, saying that, okay, a printout, what does that even mean? But think about it, there would be a chance where you might not have access to that IR plan. So it is not just one copy, but multiple copies that needs to be available for your employees so that whoever it is there, because you can't expect that everybody is going to be there at that point of time. So everybody knows where it is and everybody understands what is the first step that needs to be taken and who needs to be contacted, because breaches typically happen when it is the worst time, it is the vacation timing, it is about the Friday nights or the Saturday mornings. So make sure that if there is somebody who does not know anything about the whole IR plan, need to have it documented and it is available to them in a physical copy and it's accessible to them whenever they need it.
So first of all, if it's a ransomware type thing, I suspect we in security will know about it already because systems aren't working. But to me, then, it's the how do we continue to do operations to even implement our incident response plan, and that's where having that plan in advance, practiced, rehearsed, alternates, typically, most companies now, I assume they'll use alternate cell phones, emails, things like that they have all that documented in advance so that we can continue and make decisions on what we're going to do to recover.
Right, great. So typically on your incident response team, of course, you've got your CISO, CSOs, IT, you've got your C-suite. Who are the people that we might need to notify earlier rather than later for communication perspectives that we want to bring in on the incident response? Yep. What do you think, Casey? I know you have a thought on this one.
Not thought, but for sure, I think our customer service people, a lot of people forget about our customer service in the organization because they are the first set of people who are defending it from externally, so they need to have information. for sure your communication team, because like they are dealing with it internally and externally, and make sure that like the communication team knows about it from all the channels, like because like sometimes the communication team is specific for one channel, so we want to have different set of channels. And then of course our partners that are there, like who are responsible for it, like needs to be informed to say that who is there, what is happening. And at this point of time, I want to add in one thing, like where when one of our partners got hit, like I got 100 to 150 emails from different vendors and like vendor partners to say, hey, we can help, we can make it happen. But like you need to understand at that point of time is like you want to have the people who already have the know-how of the system, and you don't want to add any new entities at that point of time in the war room as much as possible. Of course, based on the breach, you might want to have a subject matter expertise from external to really get and do that, but like you don't want to be onboarding anybody new at this point of time, and keep it so that like they understand what is happening until and unless you have a boundary drawn to say what exactly is the incident, what is the issue, and you know that like you would need something to solve the problem.
Okay. I'll be a little controversial here. I'm saying to me, the C-suite is typically not the right group to be involved in a major breach of all over there. They'd like to be, but a lot of times roles need to change. I'm not saying part of that C-suite needs to be there, but again, you've got to look at folks who, one, can diagnose what the problem is, what the alternatives are, which typically is going to come from other people in the company as well. Yes, you'll need legal representatives, but there's other folks that may or may not be needed. So to me, it's really in an upfront establishing who will make those decisions, who has what role to do it, and the ability to go out and reach out and pull in the people you have to find out what's going on so you can make quick decisions. And again, that incident response team has to be given also the authority to make decisions, right or wrong. They have to be made, because if a group gets together in incident response and says, well, we want to shut down our system, it's ransomware, we're going to shut it down. Oh, but we can't do that till we talk to the CFO, the CEO, and all these. By the time you've gotten all that together, potentially it's too late. So again, to me, it's upfront making those decisions on who has what role is really the critical piece.
That's great. And some of the things I didn't hear mentioned, although you had alluded to it before, is PR. If your breach is bad enough or it includes personal information, bringing PR in sooner rather than later if it's external. Like you should already have that name. You should have it written down. If something illegal has happened, you do need to inform the police. I know there's like a thing, especially in Toronto. I mean, the Toronto Police Cyber Department is overwhelmed and doesn't have the staff to deal with every cyber incident. But if it's illegal, they should inform the authorities for sure as well. So making sure you have all of those names and numbers and that you are also reaching out to them at the beginning. So all of this communication plan should be in place in your incident response plan at the beginning of what you're doing, and not 3 weeks into, look, I've already found something and now we know what it is. So during the breach, so one of the things I have found with clients is nobody has a communication timeline in their incident response. So I don't know how many people here have it. A table, how often are you syncing back up to connect? How often are you, is it every hour? Is it every day? Is it, and depends on the severity of the incident. So when time is really obviously of the essence, like how do you balance, we need to go off and get our work done, and I don't want to sit in a meeting room all day, but we also need to get back together. So realistically, how often do you think companies should be providing updates internally when this is happening and working together?
I think it depends upon two things, right? Like it depends upon the culture of the organization and the nature of business that you are in, because like if you are in any public facing and like if you have a lot of public data, so you want to be informing people regularly. And the second part of it is like the type of the incident. So I think the first few meetings determine what is the frequency of it, because like if you know that like it is going to take 8 to 10 hours to really identify the incident and like figure out what really has happened, there is no point in following an IR plan blindly to say every 2 hours I'll meet and like I'll have to say the same thing, saying that the team is still working on it, because like that is not valuable answer to anybody. It adds more frustration than like it creates any clarification. So I think first 2 meetings determine the pace with which what the next meeting will go in, because you'll have a better understanding about like where your team is, what are they looking at. that is when you, as like whoever is leading that IR plan, makes that call to say, it's going to be after 6 hours that we are going to meet, and it is the next update is going to be released in the next 6 hours, 4 hours, whatever that time is, depending upon the feedback that you got from the technical team actually who is working on. So there is no set timeline, and also we need to be very, very careful, because if it's a public-facing organization, there are a lot of things, because like if you don't communicate, there is miscommunication that's happening. There are a lot of people who are speculating on the things. So there are two pieces of it. One is from an update perspective. The second is from an informing perspective. So the information needs to go into every certain hours, like at a certain stage, like everything, that so that people know that like you're working on it. But from an update perspective, that needs to be determined based on the input that is given from the technical team, and then like you need to decide based on how major the incident is.
I see that each incident team will come together either virtually or however they come together. They're going to dole out assignments. You need to go figure out, well, how severe is the incident? How many people are affected, internally, externally? Based on that, legal, what are the communications we're required to do in this state or this state or this state? So you sort of go down the line and make assignments, and based upon that, then you get back. Typically, at least for the incidents I've been involved with, it's hourly. It's that close to where certain people need to get back. I think as time goes on, you'll make further decisions on who else needs to be involved in the team, how often they need to. But again, one of the biggest mistakes that I've seen folks do is feel that obligation to get communication out too quickly too. And there's that fine line of, do you want to get any communication out, or do you want it to be accurate? Because again, it's very easy in the beginning to especially don't be specific if you don't have the details. If you don't know what caused it, if you don't know what the extent is, don't go out and say it's not that bad, because then you're going to have to eat your words later on if you find out it is that bad. So to me, this is all about, and again, I always took the cue from our communications team who work with legal to make decisions on, well, how much do we see, and even internally, because you have to assume that if something goes out internally, it's also going out externally. It's just, it's a simple matter of numbers, and the word will get out. So you have to be, I think, very cautious, but again, still meeting legal obligations and all the other things.
That's great. And speaking of external communication, so clearly with all the new privacy regulations, existing privacy regulations, we have a lot of thresholds we have to meet now for which we identify individuals, also authorities. But from the individual perspective, if their credentials have been leaked and it puts them at risk, we have an obligation to let them know as soon as possible as well. So where are we now in terms of especially patients, users, clients? How do we know when to notify an individual? Who's crafting that message? And how soon do you have to get that message out?
Yep. The communication, I think, how much you're doing and the requirement to do that, again, it's going to vary depending on what the circumstances are. I think that most companies, when they start to go through this and they're starting to make that decision on, well, we've got to communicate to this person within a certain amount of time. How many of you all, I'm sure, have contracts with your customers that require notification if there's a breach, or you have vendors that even require that notification? I've worked very hard with our internal teams to make sure that you put in there, once we know it affects you. In other words, we may have a breach internally that has no impact external at all, so I don't want to have to be reporting that to them but based upon that. So being very careful in the way you word things helps in the beginning. Then you've got all the legal requirements from HIPAA or the healthcare example you gave there. Again, you can't communicate till you know what's wrong. Just the fact that you know something's gone wrong doesn't mean you don't know the impact of what it's had on people. So being very, very cautious on how you, and again, you can tell I'm leaning on the side of less communication, not more, but you do have to do enough. There is no question of that, but all I can tell you is sending out the wrong information, that having to retract it and change it will, at least from an image perspective, hurt you much more than being a little slower at getting the data out. That's just my opinion. But.
And the only thing that I would like to add is like communication is two-way. So that's why like people always focus on like what am I saying it to my customers or my employees but like they forget like what do the employees actually want or the customers really want. So setting up that like feedback mechanism is very important, monitoring it, answering those questions. That is going to change the game for people. That is going to give that confidence rather than the standard templated information that you're going to post it in your website or social media.
That's true. And so from a regulatory perspective, so people know with GDPR with Europe, if you have European customers and you are what's called a processor, if you are serving a European customer, it is still 72 hours to let users know that their information's been breached. So you have to let the controlling company know as soon as possible, because that timeline has already started ticking and they now need to go back and tell those users within that same 72 hours. So if you're sitting on it for 70 hours and you let them know, now you've put them in a bind, because they're obligated to inform those individuals. The other thing is a lot of authorities, a lot of these data protection authorities have certain information they require in a notification and some they do not. So it's best, you don't need to share, you want to share what you want, what you have to share, but not what you don't. So preparing communication templates in advance is another way you can save a lot of time, especially as KC said, you want to personalize it and make it explicit to this, not just a template, but you do want to say, here's what happened, here's what we did about it, and here's what you can do. Even if it's change your password and it means nothing because their password wasn't breached. I see that all the time. I'm like, but the password was encrypted. But even if you just say change your password, it gives someone something to do and they feel a little more in control of the situation so they're not so lost. All right, so we also have regulatory authorities that need to know. So when do you need to report that you've had a breach?
I think I would say err on the side of caution, like, and report it every time, because like I think it's better to let them know. But at the same time, look at what is the magnitude. It all depends upon the magnitude and like what is the kind of information that it is happening. Like if it is a ransomware, like if you still don't know part of it, so don't create like too much work for yourself by informing everybody. But at the same time, like once you have a clarity on what exactly has happened, you want to have that conversation going, like to really say, whether it's your insurance, whether it's your regulatory bodies, like any other thing based on the kind of organization that you are, make sure that like you have that channel of communication open and ask them the questions of what is the threshold that like you need to report it, because getting that information is very, very important. Having everything lined up is also an important one, like rather than trying to do it at the end.
Yeah, to me, this is a instance where you need to have a relationship with your regulators, all of them, any of those that may impact you, whether it's in healthcare or financial or whatever it is. Having that relationship up front, you can have those discussions before an event happens and understand what thresholds they're expecting. When I was in healthcare out in California for there, the Attorney General there was very sensitive to healthcare leakage because of the company I worked for. It had some leakage problems in the past. So they were extremely sensitive, so we had to respond very, very quickly in those cases with them, letting them know, even if we didn't know any details of how many yet, they wanted to know something had happened. So again, to me, this is relationship-based that you've got to know. And yes, there are regulations that require X, X, and X, but again, a relationship will get you through a whole lot of that. And there's nothing wrong with in advance just saying, what's your sensitivity? What do you want to know? When do you want to know? Because we don't want to overwhelm you at the same time with calling you every other day with every little thing that, you know, when something clicks that shouldn't have happened.
And every regulatory body is a little bit different. Some of them, it's the number of individuals who were included in the breach. Sometimes it's the level of sensitivity of the information. So whether or not you report to that authority very much helps to have a table to say, here's where all of our clients are, here's when we actually report it. So one more question, we're going to talk about PR gone bad. So the LCBO, which is our Liquor Control Board of Ontario, was breached a couple weeks ago, and somebody had put malware onto their payment page, basically their payment page, and it was scraping all the payment information. When LCBO released their PR statement, they made it the customer's fault, which is pretty awful. They said, if you happen to put your information on this page, you may have been breached. We're going to big a big thumbs down on that communication. So what are some examples, Jim? I know you have one of where if you don't cover PR properly, it could come back and actually bite you in the butt.
Yeah, that's, I've had several examples where we've probably sent the wrong communication out a little, especially at the timing before you get the full knowledge of what's going on. And again, that's the biggest part that I would say is make sure everything you send out is either vague enough or it doesn't contain things that you're going to have to go back and recant later, because especially if it gets in the news and others, that's what they're going to focus on. They're really going to jump on you saying, well, you said it was only 20 people were affected, and now it's 20,000. That's very hard to come back from, because then you lose credibility, and then they assume underneath you're hiding all kinds of things. So I think just being honest up front, saying we're investigating, we are determining, yes, we've had a breach, we don't know the impact, we'll let you know as soon as we determine the extent of it and what type of information is done, and I think that's the way you have to go with this.
I have a lot to say, but I'll keep my mouth shut on this. I think all I can say is you need to be transparent at majority of the time to really say what is happening. But at the same time, you can't divulge too much information because sometimes you don't even know at that point of time. Yeah. So make sure that anything that you are putting, you are 200% sure that that is what it is. If not, don't put it on that.
Fantastic.
Absolutely.
And we have a few minutes if anyone has any questions. Yep.
I don't have a question, but I wanted to reiterate some of the points you made. And one thing that was missed, establishing privilege earlier on when you have an incident is absolutely critical. Any communication regarding the incident, potential or existing incident has to go through the order that you obtain for this use. I have seen a lot of organizations do that without getting the policy. And later on it can become a major issue. So that's one of the risks. Jim, your point about incident response team, absolutely critical. If anyone can take a big message from here, incident response team needs to include all the stakeholders, whether it's privacy, whether it's PR, communication people, and incident response team has to have that already set. And it's usually the CISO office or CISO leading that, but that's absolutely critical to have that in place before you can start scratching the network.
Yeah.
Just wanted to make those points.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you.
I think you bring up a great point, too, that the incident response team is so important, but also the incident response team needs to practice. Tabletop exercises, all those wonderful things that you do in advance to build muscle memory around things going wrong and how to react is, again, critical. Also, I think if you're like me, at least anyway, you're going to discover many things that you didn't know. Even when you do just a standard disaster recovery test, you discover systems that you may have had that you said, well, that wasn't important, but we can't use it. A good example of that is some of your identity systems. Is that something you put on your critical list or not? Because if identity system's down, you can't log in to get to anything else. Yeah, we know that your revenue system, your health patient record system, all that's critical, but if you really, unless you practice and do testing and understand what's there, you very likely are going to get a dependent app or something below that that's going to bite you if something actually happens.
And I will add that when you're doing this tabletop, you have to include the whole company. You would never do a fire drill and only evacuate one group in one small business unit. You have to include everyone, or else in the time of an actual incident, people don't know what to do. All right, so we are at time. I want to thank everyone very much. We are around for networking and lunch and breaks if anyone has any more questions. And then we're going to our next session. Thank you.
Thank you.